Dear listeners, welcome to the Good Audio Story channel today. Today, you and your friends, please join Queen Dark Romance to listen to a story of everyday life that is very interesting and attractive. The Difficult Decision. David sat at the worn kitchen table in his family's small countryside home. The faint golden light from an oil lamp cast shadows across his thoughtful face, highlighting his pensive eyes. His fingertips traced the cracks in the wood, a childhood habit whenever he felt anxious or faced something significant. The room carried the faint tang of fish his mother, Mrs. Thompson, had just cleaned, mingling with the rustic scent of the weathered wooden walls. A cool breeze rustled through the window, carrying the whispers of the late afternoon. He glanced at his mother, sitting across from him, her hands still deftly scaling the fish, though her movements had slowed as if she sensed what he was about to say. "Mom," David began, his soft voice nearly blending with the wind outside. He cleared his throat, steadying himself before continuing. "I've been thinking a lot about my future." Mrs. Thompson paused, the small knife hovering over the fish's body. She didn't look up, but David noticed her shoulders stiffen as if she were bracing herself. "Your future, son?" Her voice was calm and steady, but laced with a familiar trace of worry. David took a deep breath, his hands clenching in a fist beneath the table to hold back his emotions. "I didn't get into university, and I don't think I ever will. I'm not like Nathan. I'm not good at studying. I don't have his brains. But I can't just sit here, day after day, watching you struggle for us. I need to do something, Mom. I want to help you and Nathan." Mrs. Thompson set the knife down, her hands trembling slightly. She wiped them on her frayed apron, a gesture David recognized as her way of masking concern during profound moments. "David, you're still young. There are other paths besides university." "I know," David cut in, his voice firmer, shedding its earlier hesitation. "That's why I want to go to the city and work with Uncle Ben. He can teach me a trade, something practical I can use to support you and Nathan. I don't want you carrying everything anymore." The room fell silent, save for the distant chirping of crickets from the fields beyond. Mrs. Thompson's face paled, her eyes widening with fear and resignation. "The city, it's not like here, David. It's harsh and noisy, and you'll be alone. I don't want you to suffer there." David leaned forward, reaching across the small table to grasp his mother's hand. Her skin was rough and calloused from years of hard work, a sharp contrast to his still soft hands despite occasional farm chores or repairs. "Mom, I'm not a kid anymore. I can do this, and I won't be alone. Uncle Ben will be there. Please, talk to him for me, will you?" Mrs. Thompson's eyes welled with tears, her thin lips trembling as she fought back her emotions. She squeezed David's hand tightly, the strength in her grip catching him off guard. "You're my son, David. I want what's best for you. But if this is what you truly want, I'll call Uncle Ben tonight." David's heart leaped, a wave of relief washing over him. He stood, stepping around the table to envelop his mother in a tight embrace. The familiar scent of cheap soap and a faint hint of lavender from her hair wrapped around him, a comfort he knew he'd miss when he left. "Thank you, Mom. I promise I'll make you proud." Mrs. Thompson hugged him back, her hand patting his back as she had when he was a child. "Just promise me you'll take care of yourself, okay? And don't forget to write or call when you can." David nodded, his throat tight with emotion, unable to say more. "I will, Mom. I promise. Farewell to Hannah." The next afternoon, David and Hannah walked along the riverbank where they'd first met 3 years ago. The water flowed quietly, its smooth surface reflecting the fiery red sunset as if bearing witness to their final moment together. David held Hannah's hand, their fingers interlocked tightly, his steps deliberately slow as if to stretch out their time. His heart felt heavy, torn between love and the sorrow of impending separation. "Do you remember the first day we met here?" Hannah said softly, her voice gentle like the rustling leaves in the breeze. Her eyes gazed distantly at the river as if searching for the memory. "You dropped your hat, and I ran to pick it up for you." David smiled, though it carried a trace of sadness. He squeezed her hand tighter. "I remember. That day, I knew you were the most special person in my life." They stopped beneath the large tree by the river, its canopy shielding them from the fading daylight. Hannah turned to him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears, revealing a vulnerability she rarely showed. David, do you have to go? I don't want to be apart from you. David pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as if it were the only way to keep her with him. His voice trembled as he spoke. I don't want to go anywhere, Hannah. I want to stay here with you, with these peaceful days. But I have to do something for my family. I promise I'll come back, and we'll start again right here by this river. Hannah nodded, tears streaming down her rosy cheeks. She clutched his shirt, her tiny fingers gripping tightly, as if unwilling to let go. I'll wait for you, but you have to promise not to forget me, no matter how many temptations or prettier girls you meet in the city. I promise, David whispered, leaning down to kiss her forehead gently, then slowly moving to her soft lips. The kiss was tender and lingering, encapsulating all their love, longing, and helplessness against fate. When he pulled away, he wiped the tears from her cheeks and said softly, "Wait for me, okay?" Hannah smiled feebly, her lips pressed together to stifle a sob. She waved as David turned and walked away, his figure gradually vanishing down the winding path back to the village. He didn't look back, quickening his pace to hide the silent tear rolling down his cheek. Nathan's reaction. Nathan stood silently by the window in his small room, his eyes following David's figure as it faded beyond the village road. His heart clenched, a mix of sadness and emptiness washing over him. David wasn't just his older brother. He was his hero, the one who shielded him from the bigger village kids, patiently taught him letters and numbers, and instilled hope for a better future. "David, don't go," Nathan mumbled, gripping the window frame until his knuckles turned white. He recalled summer evenings when David sat beside him at their little wooden table, explaining math problems he couldn't grasp. He remembered racing across the fields together, flying homemade kites high in the vast blue sky. David always told him, "Nathan, you have to study hard to help Mom later, so our family won't have to struggle anymore." Tears rolled down Nathan's cheeks, hot and salty. But he quickly wiped them away with his sleeve, not wanting his mother to see him weak. He turned to his study corner, opened his math book, and picked up his pencil with trembling hands. "He's leaving for our family. I can't be weak," he told himself, his inner voice ringing with resolve. His admiration for David transformed into a fierce drive. Nathan vowed to study diligently so that one day, when his brother returned, he could hold his head high and say, "David, I did it." First day in the city, David stepped off the rickety bus, his legs stiff after the 10-hour journey from the countryside to the city. Before him stretched an alien landscape, towering skyscrapers, incessant car horns, and a throng of people bustling along wide streets. The cacophony of engines, chatter, and the acrid smell of exhaust overwhelmed him, a jarring contrast to his village's quiet fields and whispering winds. He hugged his worn backpack tightly, walking hesitantly along the stone-paved sidewalk. Everything felt too big, too fast, making him feel small and lost amid the sea of strangers. David paused at a roadside food stall, the aroma of grilled bread and skewered meat stirring his hunger. But he only dared to watch from afar, clutching the few coins his mother had pressed into his hand before he left. "David!" A warm, deep voice called out, snapping him from his thoughts. He turned to see Uncle Ben, a family acquaintance his mother had contacted, approaching with a hearty slap on his shoulder. "You're here. Come with me to my place for dinner. There is no need to be shy." David nodded, a sense of relief easing his nerves at seeing a familiar face in this foreign land. On the way to Uncle Ben's house, he peered out the car window, taking in the crowded streets and flickering neon lights against the night sky. Curiosity and anxiety swirled within him as he silently vowed, "I have to try hard so I don't let Mom and Hannah down." Meeting old Joe. On his first day at the construction site, David stood frozen amid the roar of machinery and the flurry of dozens of workers around him. He'd never done heavy labor before, and the shovel in his hands felt foreign as he stared blankly at the piles of bricks and cement scattered about. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his legs trembling as he stood amidst the chaos. "Hey, you new guy?" A gravelly voice called from behind. David turned to see an older man with silver hair, his frame thin but wiry, a kind smile playing on his cracked lips. "I'm Joe, old Joe, they call me. Don't be scared. I'll help you get the hang of this." David shook his hand, gratitude swelling at finding someone willing to guide him in this unfamiliar place. "Thank you, sir. I am Dave." Old Joe pointed to the stack of bricks and cement bags nearby, walking him through each step. Grip the shovel firmly, mix mortar evenly, and lay bricks so the wall stood firm. "Take it slow, but be careful," he advised, his tone steady and seasoned. Over the next few days working alongside old Joe, David picked up the basics of the trade and listened to the older man's life stories, from his tough early years to the lessons he'd learned. Those tales became a small flame, steadying David's resolve in this strange city. The construction site accident. A few weeks later, one morning at the site buzzed with extra activity due to a significant project nearing its deadline. David was checking his work when a loud crash erupted from above. He looked up to see several bricks tumbling from the third floor of the building under construction. Without thinking, he lunged forward, shoving a stunned co-worker out of harm's way. But his right arm didn't pull back in time, crushed beneath a heavy brick, blood spilling out and staining his work shirt red. He clenched his teeth to stifle a scream, his left hand clutching the wound as sweat mixed with blood dripped onto the dry ground. His co-workers rushed over in a panic, hurriedly taking him to the nearest hospital. The doctor bandaged him carefully, instructing him to rest for at least 2 weeks until he healed. Back at his lodging, Helen, his neighbor across the hall, saw him limping in, her eyes widening with concern, her hand flying to her mouth. "David, what happened to your arm?" He forced a weak smile, lifting his bandaged arm. "Bricks fell, saved someone. It's fine, just 2 weeks to heal." Helen frowned, crossing her arms, her tone a mix of reprimand and worry. "Fine, you say? How are you supposed to manage with that arm? Come stay with us. I'll cook for you during this time." David shook his head, waving lightly in refusal. "I don't want to trouble you and Michael." "Don't be silly. Michael won't mind," Helen insisted, leaving no room for argument. She stepped forward, gently tugging him toward her home, ignoring his hesitant gaze. The relationship between David and Helen. During his stay at Helen's, David and Helen grew closer through their daily conversations. One afternoon, as they prepared lunch in her tiny kitchen, Helen accidentally brushed his hand while passing a bowl of fish sauce. Both froze, their eyes locking for a fleeting moment, their hands trembling from the unexpected touch. David quickly turned away, gripping the wooden spoon tightly, his heart racing as thoughts of Hannah, the girl he'd promised to return to, flooded his mind. Helen lowered her head, smoothing her lengthy hair, trying to hide her flushed cheeks and the quickening beat of her heart. That night, David lay on the spare bed in Helen's living room, hands clasped behind his head, staring at the dark ceiling. He thought of Helen, her kindness and care, and then of Hannah, waiting for him back home. He berated himself for letting his heart waver, even briefly. In her room, Helen tossed and turned, clutching her pillow, torn between her growing feelings for David and her duty to Michael, her often absent husband. 2 weeks later, with his arm healed, David decided to return to his place. Before leaving, he stood at Helen's door, bowing slightly, his hands clenched to steady his emotions. "Thank you, Helen and Michael, so much. I won't forget your kindness." Helen smiled, waving lightly, her voice soft but tinged with a hint of sadness. "Good luck with Hannah, David." Helen's diary. March 10th. David came over for dinner tonight with Michael and me, although Michael ate quickly and left for work again. He talked about his job at the site, his eyes lighting up as he described the new things he learned daily. I love listening to him and the way he smiles, a warm smile I rarely see from Michael anymore. Michael's always busy, never noticing if I'm happy or sad. I know I shouldn't feel this way, but whenever David's near, my heart beats faster. What do? March 18th. David and I washed dishes after dinner. When his hand brushed mine in the soapy water, my face burned as if the whole room suddenly filled with warmth. I feel guilty about Michael, about the years we've spent together, but I can't stop thinking about David. He's gentle and caring and makes me feel valued, something I've longed for so long. What do I do when my heart keeps turning to him, even though I know it's wrong? Nathan's university life. Nathan sat in the university library, flipping through thick textbooks, his eyes fixed on the lines of text. He'd just received a letter from David praising his academic achievements and reminding him to look after their mother while he was away. Nathan smiled, clutching the letter tightly, feeling his brother's pride and encouragement radiating from the words. He recalled their childhood in the village, David teaching him to craft simple paper kites or sitting patiently by his side at night, explaining math problems he couldn't solve. "David, I won't let you down," Nathan murmured, picking up his pen to jot down new formulas. He resolved to study harder, so that one day, when his brother returned, he could stand beside him with pride and say, "David, I've done it." The journey home. David returned to the village during the Lunar New Year of his second year away. As the bus pulled into the familiar village stop, he stepped off, arms outstretched, breathing in the crisp, clean air of home, the scent of earth, grass, and a faint whiff of smoke from nearby hearths. He ran toward his house, his exhaustion replaced by eager anticipation to reunite with his family. Mrs. Thompson sat on a small wooden chair at the doorstep, peeling an orange with slow, deliberate motions. When she saw David, her eyes sparkled, and her trembling hands dropped the fruit to the ground. David rushed forward, enveloping her in a tight hug, tears streaming down his suntanned cheeks. "Mom, I'm home." Nathan stepped out from inside, his eyes red as he saw his brother. He opened his arms wide, joining the embrace, and the three of them stood together, laughter mingling with joyful tears filling their humble home. That afternoon, David sought out Hannah. She was tending the garden behind her house, her hands deftly pulling weeds, her lengthy hair tied neatly and cascading over her shoulders. He crept up quietly, wrapping his arms around her from behind, holding her tightly. "I'm back. Do you remember our promise?" Hannah turned, her eyes brimming with surprise and joy, playfully swatting his chest. "You're so late. I waited over 2 years for you, you know." David laughed, taking her hand and lacing their fingers together. "I'm sorry, Hannah. I've saved enough to marry you now. Will you have me?" Hannah smiled, her eyes shining with happiness, her grip tightening on his hand. "Yes, but you'd better promise it's just me from now on." They walked hand in hand along the familiar village path, their fingers entwined in a silent vow never to part again. Queen Dark Romance hopes you will support and accompany the Story Channel by clicking on subscribe for the channel and the notification bell. Thank you very much. Hello, and see you again.